My husband's girlfriend showed up at our anniversary dinner wearing the diamond bracelet I'd seen him hide 3 weeks ago. "Happy anniversary, Natalie," she said with a twisted smile, expecting me to crumble. Instead, I reached into my purse and placed a flash drive on the table. "The prenup protects against infidelity," I said calmly, "and I have 6 months of documentation." The color drained from his face as our entire table fell silent. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. I stood before the mirror in our master bedroom, smoothing down the emerald green dress that hugged my curves perfectly. At 43, I'd learned that true elegance wasn't about looking soft, it was about projecting power. The dress had cost more than most people's monthly rent, but tonight, it was armor. "You look incredible, Mrs. Brennan," said Lucia, our housekeeper, pausing at the doorway with fresh towels. "Thank you, Lucia," I replied, fastening pearl earrings to my lobes. My neck remained bare, waiting for the diamond bracelet I'd discovered hidden in Trevor's study drawer exactly 21 days ago. I'd found it while searching for our insurance documents. The Tiffany blue box had been poorly concealed beneath a stack of golf magazines Trevor hadn't touched in years. My hands had trembled as I opened it, expecting to see my anniversary gift early. The bracelet inside was exquisite, platinum links adorned with princess-cut diamonds, probably worth $40,000. The same bracelet I'd admired 6 months earlier while window shopping in downtown Riverside with Trevor on a rare date afternoon. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey. If you're drawn to stories about strength, strategy, and women who refuse to accept betrayal quietly, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us share more empowering narratives. Now, let's watch as Natalie Brennan transforms 18 years of deception into the perfect anniversary revelation. My hands were steady now as I applied my lipstick, a deep burgundy that matched my calculated resolve. The trembling had stopped weeks ago, replaced by something colder, sharper. Tonight required absolute precision. I thought back to the moment everything shattered. It was a Thursday morning in March, rain streaming down the windows of Brennan and Associates, the architectural firm Trevor and I had built from nothing. Well, mostly from my nothing, my inheritance, my design expertise, my endless hours drafting proposals while Trevor schmoozed clients over expensive lunches. I'd been reviewing our quarterly credit card statements, something I did religiously as the firm's financial officer, though my business card read Vice President of Operations. Trevor thought CFO sounded too aggressive for a woman, even when that woman was his wife and business partner. A charge for $42,000 from Tiffany & Company had jumped out at me. No client gift notation, no business justification. Strange, I'd thought. My birthday had passed in January. Christmas was months away. Our anniversary wasn't until August. When I'd asked Trevor about it over dinner that evening, his answer came too smoothly, too rehearsed: client appreciation gift for the Rutherfords. Patricia mentioned she loved Tiffany. I'd smiled and nodded, cutting my salmon into precise pieces. The next morning, I'd called Patricia Rutherford myself, casually mentioning how I was thinking of getting something from Tiffany and asking what Trevor had gotten her. The confusion in her voice confirmed everything. "Trevor hasn't given me anything from Tiffany, Natalie. Is everything all right?" That night, while Trevor showered, I'd accessed his email. His password hadn't changed since we'd gotten married, Natalie and Trevor 2007. The man could design award-winning buildings but couldn't manage basic digital security. The truth arrived in a cascade of emails between Trevor and my project coordinator, Amber Hayes. 26 years old, brilliant with 3D modeling software, eager to prove herself in the male-dominated world of architecture. I'd hired her 18 months ago, mentored her through her first major project, invited her to our home for dinner parties. "She's going to love it," Amber had written in response to the Tiffany receipt. "Almost as much as I loved what you got me for Valentine's Day." Their messages were sickeningly intimate. Inside jokes, plans for weekend getaways when I thought Trevor was at construction sites, detailed discussions about future plans that somehow didn't include me. A car horn pierced through my memories. Trevor was downstairs, probably checking his Rolex with theatrical impatience. Natalie. Reservations are at 7:30, he called up the stairs. We can't be late. The irony wasn't lost on me. Trevor Brennan, the man who'd missed our daughter's high school graduation because a client dinner ran long, suddenly concerned about punctuality. But tonight was special. He'd reserved the private terrace at Sapphire, the most exclusive restaurant in Riverside Heights. A venue that cost $5,000 just for the space rental, not including food or wine. What Trevor didn't know was that I'd called Sapphire's owner, Richard Monroe, 2 weeks ago. Richard and I had gone to university together, and his restaurant had been one of our firm's first major projects. The private terrace he'd promised Trevor would now accommodate additional seating, tables I'd personally arranged, filled with carefully selected guests. Lawrence and Diana Chin, our oldest friends and business associates. Gregory Walsh, our primary investor who controlled 30% of the firm's shares. Amanda Price, a senior writer from Riverside Business Monthly. And at the table nearest to ours, Harold Kim, the attorney who'd helped structure our prenuptial agreement 18 years ago. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. Alright, let's get back to it. The drive to downtown Riverside took 20 minutes through tree-lined streets and past the buildings we designed together. Trevor was animated, gesturing enthusiastically as he talked about the new convention center project, our biggest commission yet. You look absolutely stunning tonight, he said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. His thumb brushed against my bare wrist. I have something very special for you. Something worthy of 18 incredible years. 18 years. I'd been 25 when we married, fresh out of graduate school with my master's in architecture and structural engineering. Trevor had been 30, charming and ambitious, with more vision than technical skill. We'd been a perfect team, my precision and his charisma, my calculations and his client relationships. Or so I'd believed. You've really outdone yourself with this reservation, I said, watching the city lights reflect off the river. Sapphire on a Friday night. You must have called in some serious favors. Only the best for my beautiful wife, Trevor replied, his voice warm with what I once would have mistaken for genuine affection. Now I recognized it as performance, the same tone he used when pitching to skeptical clients. As we pulled up to Sapphire's valet stand, I checked my lipstick one final time in the visor mirror. Inside my clutch was the flash drive containing 6 months of carefully documented evidence. Bank statements, email threads, hotel receipts, photographs taken by the private investigator I'd hired in April. But more importantly, it contains something Trevor had no idea I'd discovered, documentation of financial irregularities in our firm's accounts. Money temporarily borrowed from project budgets to fund his lifestyle with Amber. Every transaction had been replaced before quarterly audits, but the digital trail remained. I stepped out of the car, my heels clicking against the cobblestone entrance. The August evening air was warm, carrying the scent of the river and expensive perfume from other diners. Trevor offered his arm, and I took it, feeling the weight of what was about to unfold. 18 years of marriage, a daughter away at college, a business we'd built from nothing, all of it about to be redefined by truth. Ready? Trevor asked, smiling down at me with what he probably thought was love. Absolutely, I replied, returning his smile with one of my own. I'd never been more ready for anything in my life. The moment that truly changed everything happened on a Wednesday afternoon in April. I was alone in our home office, supposedly organizing tax documents, when I found myself staring at Trevor's laptop, left open and unattended while he took a call in the garden. I wasn't the type of wife who snooped. In 18 years of marriage, I'd never once invaded his privacy. But something had shifted after that Tiffany charge, after Patricia Rutherford's confused response. A nagging suspicion had burrowed into my mind and refused to leave. My hands hovered over the keyboard. Through the window, I could see Trevor pacing near the pool, animated on his phone call. Just one look, I told myself. Just to confirm I'm being paranoid. His email was already open. I scrolled through his inbox, seeing the usual client communications, vendor invoices, project updates. Nothing unusual. Maybe I really was being. Then I saw the folder labeled A. Just a single letter, tucked between archives and budget reports. My cursor hovered over it. Inside were hundreds of emails spanning back 14 months. The subject lines alone made my stomach turn. Missing you, last night was incredible, can't wait for our weekend. I clicked on the most recent one, dated just 2 days earlier. Trevor, Amber had written, I know Natalie suspects something. She's been asking me strange questions about the Riverside Convention Center timeline. Maybe we should cool things off for a while? I don't want to lose my job, and you don't want to lose everything you've built. Trevor's response was dated that same evening, don't worry about Natalie. She's completely focused on the Henderson project. Besides, she's never been the confrontational type. Even if she suspected something, she'd rationalize it away. That's just who she is, conflict avoidant to a fault. We're fine, baby. Meet me at the harbor and on Thursday? Conflict avoidant to a fault. The words hit me like a physical blow. Is that how he saw me? After 18 years of partnership, of building a business together, of raising our daughter Cameron, I was just the wife who was too timid to confront reality? I sat back in the leather desk chair, my hands shaking now, reading email after email. Their affair had started in June of last year, apparently at a construction site visit for the Waterford Plaza project. Amber had been my project coordinator on that build. I'd sent her there specifically because I trusted her judgment. The betrayal had layers. It wasn't just that my husband was having an affair, it was that he'd chosen someone I'd mentored, someone who sat across from me in weekly meetings, someone I'd celebrated with when she'd landed her first solo design opportunity. But what destroyed me most was reading how he talked about me. Natalie's brilliant with numbers and structural calculations, he'd written in one email, but she doesn't understand the client relationship side of things. That's why I handle all the presentations. She's better behind the scenes. Behind the scenes. Just like he positioned me our entire marriage. I thought back to our origin story, the narrative Trevor loved to tell at dinner parties and networking events. We'd met at Stanford during my graduate program. He was completing an MBA, and I was deep in my master's thesis on sustainable urban architecture. We'd met at a campus coffee shop when he'd asked to share my table. Within 3 months, we were inseparable. Within 6 months, he'd proposed. Within a year, we were married and launching Brennan and Associates with my grandmother's inheritance, $750,000 that she'd left specifically for me to pursue my architectural dreams. We'll be partners in everything, Trevor had promised on our wedding night at the small inn in Monterey. Your technical genius and my business savvy. We're going to build an empire together. And we had built something. Brennan and Associates now employed 43 people, had annual revenues exceeding $12 million, and had won 6 regional design awards. Our buildings dotted the Riverside skyline, the Meridian Tower, the Westbrook Cultural Center, the Riverside Medical Plaza. But whose name was on those awards? Who gave the keynote speeches at architecture conferences? Who was featured in Riverside Business Monthly's 40 Under 40 5 years ago? Trevor Brennan. Always Trevor Brennan. I was listed on our website as Vice President of Operations, a title that made me sound like I managed office supplies rather than structural engineering calculations and project budgets. When journalists interviewed us, Trevor positioned himself as the visionary architect and me as his invaluable support system. The truth was different. I held 2 degrees, a bachelor's in civil engineering and a master's in architecture. Trevor had an MBA and a bachelor's in business administration. He couldn't calculate load-bearing requirements or design a functional floor plan to save his life. What he could do was schmooze. He could take clients to expensive dinners, remember their children's names, play golf at the country club, and make them feel like they were his only priority. He was the face of Brennan and Associates. I was the brain. Sitting in that office, reading those emails, I realized something profound. I'd been erased from my own story. Gradually, systematically, over 18 years, Trevor had positioned me as secondary to my own accomplishments. And I'd let him. That realization sparked something in me that I hadn't felt in years: anger. Pure, clarifying rage. I spent the next hour methodically copying every email in that folder to a secure cloud drive. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I installed monitoring software on his laptop, the kind that would send me copies of every email, every text message, every calendar appointment. Over the next 3 weeks, I watched their affair unfold in real time. The Thursday afternoon site visits that were actually hotel rooms downtown. The weekend in Napa that Trevor told me was a solo retreat to work on the convention center designs. The jewelry he'd bought her, not just for Valentine's Day, but for her birthday, for their anniversary of being together. But I discovered something else, something that transformed my heartbreak into strategy. I'd always handled our firm's finances, but Trevor controlled certain accounts, specifically the discretionary project funds allocated for client entertainment and unexpected construction costs. In early May, while reviewing account reconciliations, I noticed irregular transfers. $25,000 moved from the Henderson project budget to Trevor's personal account, then returned 3 weeks later. $40,000 borrowed from the convention center contingency fund, replaced the following month. The pattern repeated across multiple projects over the past 18 months. Trevor was temporarily borrowing client money to fund his lifestyle with Amber. The 5-star hotels, the expensive gifts, the weekend getaways, all financed with money that wasn't his to spend. He was always careful to replace it before quarterly reviews, but the digital footprint remained. This wasn't just infidelity. This was embezzlement. Fraud. Criminal behavior that could destroy our firm, tank our reputation, and potentially send Trevor to prison. I printed every bank statement, every transfer record, every piece of evidence. Then I called Harold Kim, the attorney who'd structured our prenuptial agreement. "Natalie," Harold greeted me warmly when I arrived at his office on a Tuesday morning. "Trevor thought I was meeting with the Planning Commission. What can I do for you?" I laid out everything: the affair, the financial improprieties, the systematic way Trevor had marginalized my role in the firm I'd largely financed. Harold listened carefully, making notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said something I'll never forget. "Do you remember the infidelity clause in your prenup?" I vaguely recalled discussions about it. Trevor's father, a wealthy real estate developer, had insisted on prenuptial protection. The irony was that the clause was designed to protect Trevor from a potentially unfaithful wife. If either party commits proven infidelity, Harold explained, the prenup stipulates that the innocent party receives 60% of all marital assets, plus the right to buy out the guilty party's share of any jointly owned businesses at 1/3 of market value. I stared at him. That would give me controlling interest in Brennan and Associates. Exactly. And given that you can prove your initial investment funded the company's launch, plus document your ongoing contributions to its success, we'd have a very strong case that you're entitled to far more than 60%. I hired a private investigator the next day. Jasmine Rodriguez came highly recommended, former police detective, now specializing in domestic cases and corporate fraud. She was thorough, discreet, and completely professional. "I'll need about 4 weeks to build a comprehensive file," she told me during our first meeting. "Photos, timeline documentation, financial forensics. When we're done, there won't be any room for doubt." Those 4 weeks felt endless. I maintained perfect normalcy at home. I smiled at Trevor across the breakfast table, discussed project timelines over dinner, attended Cameron's college graduation together in June, presenting a united front while I knew everything was crumbling beneath us. Amber remained my project coordinator. I assigned her work, reviewed her designs, made small talk about her weekend plans, all while knowing exactly where she'd been and who she'd been with. The hardest part wasn't the pretending. It was confronting my own complicity. For 18 years, I'd accepted Trevor's narrative about our partnership. I'd allowed him to minimize my contributions, to position himself as the primary architect of our success. I'd told myself that his confidence and charisma were assets to the firm, that my behind-the-scenes role was just as valuable. But it wasn't. Not in the eyes of our clients, our industry, or apparently, my own husband. I thought about Cameron, our 17-year-old daughter, starting her freshman year at Berkeley in the fall. She idolized her father, saw him as the successful architect who'd built an empire. She had no idea that empire was largely constructed from her mother's inheritance, calculations, and endless hours of work that went uncredited. What kind of example had I set for her? That women should accept being diminished? That intelligence and hard work were less valuable than charm and presentation? By late July, Jasmine delivered her final report. It was devastating in its comprehensiveness. 147 pages documenting Trevor's affair with Amber, including time-stamped photographs, hotel receipts, credit card statements, and text message records. But more damaging was the financial analysis showing the pattern of unauthorized fund transfers totaling over $280,000 across 14 months. Mrs. Brennan, Jasmine said, handing me the bound report, "This is one of the most clear-cut cases I've ever worked. Your husband has been systematically defrauding your joint business while conducting an affair with an employee you directly supervise. You have every legal and moral right to take control of this situation." That evening, I sat in our bedroom watching Trevor get ready for what he told me was a client dinner. I knew from his calendar sync that he was actually meeting Amber at an upscale restaurant called Luminaire, where he'd reserved a table for two. He kissed me goodbye, told me not to wait up, and left. I opened my laptop and began planning. Our 18th anniversary was 3 weeks away. Trevor had already made reservations at Sapphire, the restaurant where we'd celebrated every major milestone. He thought he was planning a romantic evening. I had something else in mind entirely. Over the next 3 weeks, I made careful arrangements. I called Richard Monroe at Sapphire and explained that I wanted to surprise Trevor with additional guests for our anniversary, close friends and business associates joining in celebration. Richard, who remembered that his restaurant existed because of my design work, was happy to accommodate. I personally called each guest, Lawrence and Diana Chen, our friends who'd suspected Trevor's behavior for months, Gregory Walsh, whose investment firm controlled a significant stake in our company, Amanda Price, the journalist, and most importantly, Harold Kim, my attorney. I didn't tell them why I was inviting them. I simply said I wanted to celebrate our anniversary with the people who mattered most to our lives and business. Then I did something that felt simultaneously empowering and terrifying. I bought myself the diamond bracelet. The exact one from Tiffany that Trevor had bought for Amber. I charged it to our joint account, the one Trevor rarely checked because he trusted me to manage our personal finances. If he was going to give my anniversary gift to his mistress, I'd simply give it to myself. The night before our anniversary, I barely slept. I ran through scenarios, imagined confrontations, rehearsed what I'd say. But more than that, I grieved. I grieved for the marriage I thought I'd had, for the partnership I believed in, for the 18 years I'd invested in building something that was never truly shared. By morning, the grief had crystallized into something else, determination. I was done being conflict avoidant. I was done being positioned behind the scenes. I was done being erased from my own story. Tonight, at Sapphire, in front of witnesses who mattered, would reclaim everything Trevor had tried to take from me, my credit, my company, and my dignity. The game was about to change. And this time, I was setting the rules. Sapphire was exactly as I remembered, golden chandeliers casting warm light across white tablecloths, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the riverside waterfront, and an atmosphere of refined elegance that made every guest feel important. The hostess, a young woman named Claire whom I'd met during my planning calls with Richard, greeted us with practiced warmth. "Mr. and Mrs. Brennan, what a pleasure. Your table is ready on the terrace." Trevor's hand rested on the small of my back as we followed Claire through the main dining room. I noticed his slight hesitation when we reached the terrace and he saw the additional tables I'd arranged. His smile flickered for just a moment before recovering. "I thought we'd reserved the private terrace," he said to Claire, his tone light but questioning. "Mrs. Brennan made some wonderful modifications," Claire responded smoothly, exactly as I'd coached her. "She wanted to celebrate with your closest friends and associates. Isn't that lovely?" Trevor turned to me, surprise evident in his eyes. "You did this?" "I wanted tonight to be special," I said, meeting his gaze steadily. "Memorable." The terrace had been transformed. Our table sat in the center, decorated with white roses and flickering candles. Surrounding us were 4 additional tables, each already occupied. Lawrence and Diana Chen sat to our left, both dressed elegantly and watching us with knowing expressions. Gregory Walsh occupied the table to our right, his silver hair and expensive suit marking him as someone important. Amanda Price from Riverside Business Monthly had positioned herself near the terrace entrance, notepad subtly placed beside her wine glass. And at the table closest to ours sat Harold Kim, my attorney, who nodded almost imperceptibly when I caught his eye. "What a wonderful surprise," Trevor said, though his voice carried an edge of uncertainty. This wasn't what he'd planned. He'd wanted an intimate evening, just the 2 of us, where he could present the bracelet with romantic flourish. We settled into our seats, and almost immediately, servers appeared with champagne. Antonio, the head waiter who'd served us countless times over the years, poured with ceremonial precision. "To 18 extraordinary years," Trevor announced, raising his glass toward me. "To the woman who makes everything possible." The words would have sounded sincere to anyone who didn't know better. But I heard the performance in them, the same practiced tone he used when pitching to clients. "To partnership," I replied, my voice steady. "And to truth." We clinked glasses, and I noticed Trevor's eyes searching mine, trying to understand the subtext he'd clearly detected. Around us, conversations buzzed. Diana Chen leaned over from her table. "Natalie, that dress is absolutely stunning. You look radiant." "Thank you, Diana. I wanted tonight to be perfect." Trevor launched into reminiscing, the way he always did at milestone celebrations. He told the story of how we met at Stanford, how I'd been so focused on my architectural thesis that I barely noticed him at first. How he'd persisted, bringing me coffee during late-night study sessions, until I'd finally agreed to dinner. "I knew from that first conversation," Trevor said, his hand covering mine on the table, "that Natalie was going to change my life. Her brilliant mind, her vision for sustainable design, I'd never met anyone like her." It was a narrative he'd perfected over the years, painting himself as the man who'd recognized my talent. What he never mentioned was that it was my grandmother's money that launched our firm. My connections through Stanford that secured our first 3 major clients. My structural expertise that saved the Meridian Tower project when the initial designs proved unstable. I was nodding along, playing my part, when I felt the atmosphere shift. Trevor's eyes moved past me, widening with unmistakable panic. His hand tightened on mine, knuckles going white. The champagne glass in his other hand trembled slightly. I didn't need to turn around. I knew exactly who had arrived. Amber Hayes appeared at the edge of our terrace, stunning in a black cocktail dress that probably cost 3 months of her salary. Her auburn hair was styled in elegant waves, her makeup flawless. But what caught everyone's attention, what made Diana Chen audibly gasp, was the diamond bracelet glittering on her wrist. My bracelet. The Tiffany piece I'd admired 6 months ago, the one Trevor had hidden in his desk drawer, the one meant to be my anniversary gift. She walked directly toward our table, her heels clicking against the terrace stone with deliberate precision. Her eyes were fixed on me, and I recognized the expression immediately. She expected me to break. To cry, to scream, to cause a scene that would make me look unstable and emotional in front of everyone who mattered in our professional world. "Happy anniversary, Natalie," Amber said, her voice carrying across the now silent terrace. She held up her wrist, making sure the diamonds caught the candlelight. "Isn't this bracelet gorgeous? Trevor has such impeccable taste." The moment stretched out, everyone watching to see how I would react. Trevor had gone pale, his carefully constructed evening collapsing around him. Lawrence Chen's expression was thunderous. Gregory Walsh had set down his fork, his investor's mind clearly calculating the implications of what he was witnessing. I felt oddly calm. 6 months of rage and heartbreak had distilled into something crystalline and cold. This was the moment I'd prepared for. "Amber," I said, my voice pleasant and conversational. "What an unexpected surprise. I don't recall seeing your name on our guest list." Trevor found his voice, higher pitched than normal. Amber was she was dropping off some documents for the convention center project. The revisions we discussed yesterday. Right, Amber? I watched Amber's confident smile falter slightly. This wasn't the reaction she'd anticipated. Where were my tears? My accusations? My feminine hysteria? That bracelet is truly beautiful, I continued, taking a sip of champagne with a steady hand. Tiffany, isn't it? Platinum with princess-cut diamonds. I admired that exact piece last February when Trevor and I went shopping together downtown. Do you remember, darling? Trevor's face had lost all color now. Natalie, I can explain. Oh, I'm sure you can, I interrupted smoothly. You've always been excellent at explanations. At presentations. At crafting narratives. I reached into my clutch, my movements deliberate and unhurried. Every eye on the terrace was fixed on me. I withdrew the small flash drive, black and unremarkable, and placed it on the white tablecloth between Trevor and me. The silence was absolute. Even the sounds from the main dining room seemed to fade away. Do you know what's interesting about prenuptial agreements? I asked, my voice carrying clearly across the terrace. Most people don't bother to read the fine print. Trevor certainly didn't, despite his father insisting on every clause. Harold Kim had stood up from his table and was now approaching ours, his presence lending legal weight to the moment. Our prenup has an infidelity clause, I continued, looking directly at Trevor's ashen face. Any proven infidelity entitles the innocent party to 60% of all marital assets, plus the right to purchase the guilty party's share of jointly owned businesses at 1/3 market value. Gregory Walsh's sharp intake of breath was audible. He understood immediately what that meant. Brennan and Associates had been valued at $8.4 million in our most recent assessment. If I could prove Trevor's infidelity, I could buy his 50% stake for roughly $1.4 million instead of $4.2 million. That flash drive, I said, tapping it with one perfectly manicured finger, contains documentation of your affair with Amber. 14 months of emails, text messages, hotel receipts, and time-stamped photographs, all compiled by a private investigator over the past 6 weeks. Amber's hand moved to cover the bracelet instinctively, as if hiding it could undo what she'd done by wearing it here tonight. But that's not all that's on this drive, I continued, my voice calm and measured. There's also documentation of unauthorized financial transfers from Brennan and Associates project budgets to your personal accounts. $280,000 temporarily borrowed across 14 months to fund hotel rooms, jewelry, weekend getaways, and various other expenses related to your affair. Trevor's champagne glass slipped from his hand, shattering against the stone terrace. No one moved to clean it up. Every server, every diner, everyone on the terrace had become an audience to this public unraveling. Those transfers were always replaced, Trevor stammered, desperation creeping into his voice. Before every quarterly review, everything was replaced, yes, I agreed. But unauthorized nonetheless. You borrowed client funds without board approval, without oversight, and certainly without my knowledge as the firm's financial officer. Gregory, I believe your investment firm would find that particularly concerning, given your fiduciary responsibilities to your own clients. Gregory Walsh's expression was granite hard. Are you telling me you've been using project funds for personal expenses, Trevor? Before Trevor could answer, I turned to Amanda Price, who was scribbling notes rapidly. Amanda, I hope you'll be fair in your coverage of this. I'm not sharing this information out of spite. I'm sharing it because I'm tired of being positioned behind the scenes while watching someone else take credit for my work, my calculations, my designs. I stood up, commanding the attention of everyone present. Brennan and Associates was founded with my inheritance, $750,000 from my grandmother. I hold dual degrees in civil engineering and architecture. I designed the structural systems for every major project we've completed. I developed the sustainable design framework that won us the Riverside Environmental Award. I personally negotiated our 3 largest contracts. My voice grew stronger, months of suppressed frustration finally finding release. But who gives the keynote speeches? Who accepts the awards? Who's featured in magazine profiles as the visionary architect? I looked directly at Trevor. You've spent 18 years positioning yourself as the talent and me as the support system. You've taken credit for my innovations, diminished my contributions, and now you've literally tried to give away my anniversary gift to the woman you've been sleeping with for over a year. Diana Chen had tears in her eyes. Lawrence's jaw was clenched with obvious anger. Even the servers had stopped pretending to be anywhere else. Natalie, please, Trevor whispered, reaching for my hand. We can discuss this privately. This doesn't need to. I pulled my hand away. Privacy has served your purposes for too long. You counted on me being conflict avoidant, too timid to confront you publicly. You actually wrote that in an email to her. I gestured toward Amber, who looked like she wanted to disappear into the terrace stones. Harold, I said, turning to my attorney, please proceed with filing the paperwork we discussed. Harold nodded formally. The divorce petition will be filed electronically within the hour, citing the infidelity clause. We're also filing an emergency motion for forensic audit of all Brennan and Associates accounts and a temporary restraining order preventing any major financial decisions without board approval. Trevor's face had gone from pale to gray. You can't do this. The firm is my life's work. Our life's work, I corrected sharply. Except it was my life, my work, and your credit. I removed my wedding rings, the engagement ring with its modest diamond, the simple gold band, and placed them next to the flash drive on the table. Happy anniversary, Trevor. The terrace erupted in murmurs and whispers. Amber had turned and fled, her confident entrance transformed into a humiliated exit. Trevor sat frozen, his perfect evening shattered beyond recognition. Gregory Walsh approached our table, his expression unreadable. Natalie, I think we need to schedule an emergency board meeting. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. I'll be there, I replied calmly. Lawrence and Diana came to stand beside me, their presence a physical declaration of allegiance. We've got your back, Lawrence said quietly. Always have. I gathered my clutch, leaving the flash drive, the rings, and 18 years of marriage on the table behind me. As I walked across the terrace toward the exit, I felt every eye following me. But this time, they weren't watching Trevor Brennan's wife. They were watching Natalie Brennan, architect, engineer, entrepreneur, finally stepping out from behind the scenes and into the spotlight that had always been rightfully hers. The night air hit my face as I exited Sapphire, cool and liberating. My phone was already buzzing with messages, but I ignored them all. Behind me, I heard Trevor calling my name one last time, his voice cracking with desperation. I didn't turn around. I'd spent 18 years responding to his voice, his needs, his vision. Tonight, I'd finally found my own. My driver, James, was waiting at the curb as I'd instructed, the car door already open. He was a retired Marine who'd worked for us for 5 years, and his expression showed no surprise at my early departure or the absence of Trevor. Everything all right, Mrs. Brennan? He asked, his tone respectful but concerned. Better than it's been in a long time, James, I replied, sliding into the back seat. The Peninsula Hotel, please. I'd booked a suite there 3 days ago, knowing I wouldn't be returning to our home in Riverside Heights tonight. As James pulled away from Sapphire, my phone began vibrating continuously. I glanced at the screen, 17 missed calls in the span of 5 minutes. Board members, business partners, friends who'd heard what happened through the lightning-fast social network of Riverside's professional elite. I silenced the phone completely. Tonight, I needed space to process what had just occurred. Tomorrow would be soon enough to manage the fallout. The city lights blurred past the window as we drove through downtown. I felt strangely disconnected from my body, as if I were watching someone else's life unfold. The woman who'd walked into Sapphire 2 hours ago felt like a different person than the one sitting in this car now. My phone screen lit up again, this time with a text from Cameron, our daughter. My heart clenched. Mom, Dad just called me crying. He said you humiliated him in public and are trying to steal his company. What's going on? Please call me. I stared at the message, feeling the first crack in my composed exterior. Of course Trevor would call Cameron immediately, spinning the narrative to cast himself as the victim. That was his special talent, reframing reality until he emerged as the wronged party. I typed back carefully, "Sweetheart, there's a lot you don't know. Can we talk tomorrow? I promise to explain everything. I love you." The 3 dots appeared, showing she was typing, then disappeared. Then appeared again. Finally, "Okay." But Dad sounded really upset, "Mom." I set the phone down, blinking back tears I'd refused to shed at the restaurant. This was the cost of finally standing up for myself, my daughter's confusion, possibly even her anger. Trevor had always been the fun parent, the one who took Cameron to concerts and bought her extravagant gifts. I was the practical one, the homework enforcer, the budgeter. Would she understand why I'd done this? Or would she see me as the bitter wife destroying her father's life out of jealousy? The Peninsula Hotel rose before us, its Art Deco facade illuminated against the night sky. James pulled up to the entrance, and a bellhop immediately appeared to open my door. "Will you need the car tomorrow, Mrs. Brennan?" James asked. "Yes. 9 a.m. pickup for the office, please." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Good night, ma'am. And if it means anything, you did the right thing." I felt tears threaten again but managed to smile. "Thank you, James." The suite I'd reserved was on the 23rd floor, overlooking the river. It was elegant and impersonal, exactly what I needed. I kicked off my heels, poured myself a glass of wine from the minibar, and finally allowed myself to check my phone properly. 43 missed calls. 68 text messages. My email inbox showed 97 unread messages in the past 2 hours. I started with Harold Kim's text, paperwork filed electronically at 9:47 p.m. Restraining order approved by Judge Morrison. Trevor cannot access any joint accounts or make business decisions without board approval until the hearing. Well done tonight, Natalie. That took extraordinary courage. Gregory Walsh had left a voicemail. "Natalie, I want you to know that the investment board will support whatever decision you make regarding Brennan and Associates. Trevor's unauthorized use of project funds is unacceptable. We need to discuss next steps immediately. Call me when you're ready." Diana Chen's message was more personal. "Natalie, Lawrence and I are so proud of you. We've watched him diminish you for years and never knew how to help. You were magnificent tonight. Call if you need anything, and I mean anything. We love you." But mixed in with the supportive messages were others. Mark Sutherland from the Riverside Architecture Association. "Natalie, I'm hearing disturbing reports about tonight. This kind of public spectacle reflects poorly on our entire professional community. I hope you'll reconsider this approach." Jennifer Wong, one of Trevor's college friends. "I can't believe you'd humiliate Trevor like that in front of his colleagues and investors. Whatever problems you're having should have been handled privately. This was cruel." I set the phone down, exhausted by the polarized reactions. Some people would always view a woman's refusal to be diminished as aggressive or vindictive. Trevor could commit fraud and adultery, but I was cruel for exposing it publicly. A soft knock at the door startled me. I checked the peephole and saw a hotel employee holding a large bouquet of white lilies, my favorite flowers. "Delivery for Mrs. Brennan," he said when I opened the door. I tipped him and brought the arrangement inside, looking for a card. It was from Lawrence and Diana, to new beginnings and long overdue truth. "You're not alone in this." I placed them on the suite's dining table, their elegant stems a reminder that not everyone viewed my actions as vindictive. Some people understood that sometimes the only way to reclaim yourself is to refuse to be silent anymore. My phone rang again. This time, I recognized the number. Patricia Winters, the managing partner at one of Riverside's most prestigious architectural firms. We'd worked on several collaborative projects over the years. I answered. "Hello, Patricia." "Natalie. I hope I'm not calling too late. I heard about tonight, the entire architecture community is talking about it." My stomach tightened. "I imagine they are. I wanted to reach out personally," Patricia continued, her voice warm. What you did took remarkable courage. I've watched Trevor take credit for your work for years. Everyone in the industry knows that Brennan and Associates' most innovative designs come from you. I felt tears sting my eyes. Thank you. That means more than you know. I'm not just calling to offer support, Patricia said. I'm calling with an opportunity. Winters and Associates has been looking to expand our sustainable design division. If you're interested, I'd like to discuss a senior partner position. You'd have full creative control, your name on every project, and equity in the firm. I sat down heavily on the sweet sofa. A job offer. Already. Patricia, I appreciate that, but I haven't even begun to sort out what happens with Brennan and Associates. I understand. But I wanted you to know you have options. You don't need Trevor's company or his approval. You never did. After we hung up, I sat in the darkening suite, watching the city lights reflect off the river. By morning, 3 more architectural firms had reached out with similar offers. The professional community's response was split, but many people, especially women who'd watched me operate in Trevor's shadow for years, saw tonight as a breaking point that was long overdue. The board meeting Gregory had called for 9 a.m. was going to be brutal. I knew Trevor would come prepared with his own narrative, his own explanations for the unauthorized transfers. He'd characterized the affair as a personal matter that had nothing to do with business operations. But I had something he didn't: comprehensive documentation and the moral high ground. I spent the hours until midnight reviewing the files Jasmine Rodriguez had compiled. Every hotel receipt had a corresponding charge from our business accounts. Every gift Trevor had bought Amber could be traced back to project funds he'd temporarily borrowed. The pattern was undeniable and damning. At some point, I must have fallen asleep on the sofa, because I woke to sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows and my phone alarm chirping insistently. 6:30 a.m. The board meeting was in 2.5 hours. I showered methodically, washing away the previous night's makeup and the emotional residue of confrontation. When I stood before the bathroom mirror, I saw someone different than the woman who'd stared back yesterday morning. My eyes looked clearer somehow, unburdened. I dressed in a charcoal gray suit, professional, authoritative, uncompromising. I pulled my hair back into a severe bun and applied minimal makeup. Today wasn't about looking soft or approachable. Today was about competence and control. James picked me up precisely at 9, and we drove to the Brennan and Associates offices in downtown Riverside. The building was one we designed ourselves 7 years ago, 12 stories of glass and steel with sustainable features that had won environmental awards. My structural calculations had made the unique cantilever design possible. Trevor's name was on the award plaque in the lobby. The conference room on the 10th floor was already full when I arrived. Gregory Walsh sat at the head of the table, flanked by the other board members: Patricia Montgomery from Montgomery Financial, David Cruz, who represented a consortium of local investors, and Evelyn Park, the independent board member we'd appointed 3 years ago for governance oversight. Trevor was already seated, looking haggard and disheveled despite clearly expensive clothing. His eyes were bloodshot, his tie slightly askew. Across from him sat his attorney, Charles Whitmore, a sharp litigator known for aggressive corporate defense. The seat at Trevor's right, where I usually sat during board meetings, was conspicuously empty. I walked past it and took the chair directly across from him instead, a small but significant repositioning. "Good morning," Gregory began formally. "Thank you all for convening on short notice. We're here to address serious allegations regarding financial improprieties and to discuss the immediate governance of Brennan and Associates given the personal circumstances between our 2 founding partners." Charles Whitmore immediately interjected. "Before we begin, I want to state for the record that Mr. Brennan categorically denies any financial wrongdoing. The transfers in question were internal budget reallocations, common practice in project management, and always properly reconciled." Harold Kim, my attorney, opened his briefcase. "If I may distribute these documents to the board? They detail 14 months of unauthorized transfers totaling $280,000, none of which were approved by the board or documented in any official capacity." As the board members reviewed the documentation, I watched Trevor's face. He was trying to maintain composure, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. He was formulating his defense, looking for angles. These transfers, Trevor began, his voice steadier than I'd expected, were made during cash flow gaps between client payments. Everything was returned before quarterly audits. No client funds were actually misappropriated. But they were used for personal expenses during those interim periods, I said quietly, speaking directly to the board rather than to Trevor. Hotel rooms, jewelry, entertainment, all related to an extramarital affair with an employee we jointly supervise. That's not budget reallocation. That's embezzlement. Evelyn Park, the independent board member, leaned forward. Natalie, can you prove these funds were used for personal rather than business purposes? I nodded to Harold, who distributed another set of documents, hotel receipts from weekends when Trevor had told me he was at construction sites, jewelry purchases that corresponded exactly with transfer dates, restaurant charges for two when Trevor claimed to be at solo client meetings. The room fell silent as the board absorbed the evidence. Patricia Montgomery's expression was particularly grave. As a financial professional, she understood the legal implications immediately. Trevor, Gregory said finally, his voice heavy with disappointment, this is indefensible. Even if every dollar was returned, the unauthorized use of project funds for personal expenses is grounds for immediate termination under our partnership agreement. Trevor's composure cracked. This is about the affair, not the finances. Natalie is weaponizing a personal matter to destroy my professional reputation. She's hurt and angry, and I understand that, but this vindictive approach. Don't, I interrupted, my voice cutting through his explanation like a blade. Don't minimize this as a woman scorned. You've spent 18 years taking credit for my work, positioning me as support staff while presenting yourself as the visionary. You've used my technical expertise to build your reputation while keeping my contributions invisible. The affair isn't the issue, it's the symptom of how little you valued me as a partner in every sense. The board members exchanged glances. Diana had been right, people had noticed. The question was whether they cared enough to act on it. David Cruz cleared his throat. I think we need to address something that's been uncomfortable to discuss but is relevant here. Trevor, you've been the public face of this firm, but industry insiders know that Natalie handles the actual technical work. The question before us isn't just about financial misconduct, it's about who actually runs Brennan and Associates. Trevor's attorney started to object, but Gregory held up a hand. David's right. We need to discuss this honestly. This firm was founded with Natalie's inheritance. The most successful projects have been those where Natalie led the structural design. And based on these documents, Trevor has been using company resources to fund a personal lifestyle that included an affair with a subordinate employee. The board has three options, Evelyn Park said, her legal training evident in how she framed the situation. 1. Maintain the status quo and hope this blows over, which seems untenable given the public nature of last night's confrontation and the documented financial issues. 2. Force both partners out and bring in external management. 3. Remove Trevor from operational control and elevate Natalie to CEO while we conduct a comprehensive audit. The choice was obvious to everyone except Trevor, whose face had gone from pale to flushed with anger. You can't seriously be considering. We're considering what's best for the firm, Gregory interrupted firmly. And what protects our investment and our fiduciary responsibilities to our own stakeholders. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. Trevor would be placed on immediate administrative leave pending a full forensic audit. I would assume the role of CEO with complete operational control. A temporary restraining order would prevent Trevor from accessing company accounts or making any decisions regarding projects, personnel, or finances. Trevor stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is a coup. You're letting her emotional reaction to a personal matter destroy everything I've built. Everything we built, I corrected softly. With my money, my expertise, and my endless hours of work that you claimed as your own. He stared at me across the conference table, and for a moment I saw genuine confusion in his eyes, as if he truly couldn't understand how his actions had led to this moment. I gave you everything, he said, his voice breaking. No, I replied. You gave me credit for nothing while taking everything I created. There's a difference. He left with Charles Whitmore, the conference room door closing with a finality that marked the end of an era. Gregory approached me after the others had filed out. That took remarkable strength, Natalie. I want you to know the board supports you completely. Thank you, I said, feeling the weight of what had just happened settling on my shoulders. I just hope I can live up to this. You already have, he replied. You've been running this firm from the shadows for 18 years. Now you'll just be doing it with the title and recognition you always deserved. As I sat alone in the conference room afterward, staring at the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I felt the magnitude of what I'd set in motion. My marriage was over. My professional partnership had dissolved. My daughter might never forgive me for publicly humiliating her father. But I also felt something I hadn't experienced in years: freedom. The golden cage had been comfortable, but it was still a cage. And I'd finally found the courage to walk out of it, even knowing the world outside would be uncertain and difficult. My phone buzzed with a text from Cameron. Can we meet for coffee this afternoon? I want to hear your side. I typed back immediately, yes. Anytime, anywhere. I love you. Whatever happened next, with the company, with the divorce, with my relationship with my daughter, I would face it as myself. Not as Trevor Brennan's wife, not as the invisible force behind Brennan and Associates, but as Natalie Brennan. Architect. Engineer. CEO. And finally, fully visible. 3 weeks after that board meeting, I sat in my new office, the corner suite that had always belonged to Trevor. The nameplate outside the door now read, Natalie Brennan, Chief Executive Officer, in brushed steel letters. I'd had maintenance remove Trevor's oversized mahogany desk and replace it with a clean glass surface that let light flow through the space. The walls, once covered with awards bearing Trevor's name, now displayed architectural blueprints, my original designs for the Meridian Tower, the Westbrook Cultural Center, the Riverside Medical Plaza. Each one annotated in my handwriting, dated, signed. Evidence of authorship that had always existed but never been displayed. The forensic audit Gregory had commissioned was complete, sitting in a bound report on my desk. The findings were more extensive than even I had anticipated. Beyond the $280,000 in unauthorized transfers related to the affair with Amber, the auditors had uncovered an additional $340,000 in questionable expenses over the past 5 years. Client dinners that never happened. Construction site visits to locations Trevor never traveled to. Equipment purchases that couldn't be accounted for. Trevor hadn't just been funding an affair. He'd been treating company resources as his personal expense account for years, always careful to keep individual transactions small enough to avoid triggering scrutiny, always replacing funds before quarterly reviews. The auditors estimated that if all questionable expenses were tallied, Trevor had essentially stolen over $600,000 from the firm we'd built together. My attorney Harold had filed additional motions based on these findings. The divorce proceedings, initially projected to take months, were now moving rapidly. Trevor's attorney had advised him to settle rather than face potential criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud. The proposed settlement was staggering, would retain 70% ownership of Brennan and Associates, our home in Riverside Heights, the vacation property in Lake Haven, and full control of our joint investment portfolio. Trevor would keep his personal accounts, his car collection, and 30% non-voting shares in the company, shares he couldn't sell without board approval. It was, by any measure, a complete victory. So why did I feel so hollowed out? My phone buzzed with a reminder: coffee with Cameron in 30 minutes at Cornerstone Cafe, the place we'd gone together since she was 12 years old. This would be our 4th meeting since the anniversary dinner, each one slightly less tense than the last. The first meeting had been brutal. Cameron had arrived angry, defensive of her father, convinced I'd orchestrated a public humiliation out of spite. She'd been crying, her face blotchy and hurt in a way that made my chest physically ache. How could you do that to him, Mom? In front of everyone? He called me sobbing, saying you'd destroyed his life over a mistake. I'd sat across from her in that same cafe, choosing my words carefully. Cameron, what your father calls a mistake was a 14-month affair with my employee. But more than that, it was 18 years of him taking credit for my work, minimizing my contributions, and planning to push me out of the company I helped build with my own inheritance. He said you're twisting everything, that you're making it about business when it's really just about the affair. I'd pulled out my laptop then, showing her the emails where Trevor discussed replacing me with Amber, the financial records documenting unauthorized transfers, the architecture award submissions where my designs were credited solely to him. Read these, I'd said quietly. Then decide if I'm twisting anything. She'd read for nearly an hour, her expression shifting from defensive anger to confusion to something that looked like betrayal. When she'd finally looked up at me, tears were streaming down her face. I didn't know, she'd whispered. I thought you just managed the office while Dad designed everything. That's what he always said. I know. That's what he told everyone. The second meeting had been different. Cameron had come with questions, hard, specific questions about our marriage, about the company, about why I'd stayed silent for so long. Why didn't you ever correct people when Dad took credit for your work? I'd struggled to answer that honestly. Because I told myself it didn't matter who got public recognition as long as the work got done. Because I convinced myself that his confidence and charisma were valuable assets to the firm. Because I was raised to believe that supporting your partner's success was more important than claiming your own. That's horrible, Mom. Yes, I'd agreed. It was. The third meeting, just 5 days ago, Cameron had apologized, something I'd never expected. I'm sorry I didn't see what was happening. I'm sorry I believed Dad's version without questioning it. And I'm sorry that I made you feel like you had to justify standing up for yourself. Now, as I drove to our fourth meeting, I felt cautiously hopeful. My relationship with my daughter had been damaged by Trevor's deception and my years of silent acceptance, but we were slowly rebuilding it on a foundation of honesty. Cameron was already seated at our usual table by the window when I arrived. She'd cut her hair shorter since I'd last seen her, and she looked older somehow, less like the girl who'd left for Berkeley 3 months ago and more like a young woman processing complex truths about her parents. Hi, Mom, she said, standing to hug me. The embrace was genuine, warm, so different from the stiff formality of our first post-dinner meeting. Hi, sweetheart. I love your hair. Thanks. I needed a change. She gestured to the coffee she'd already ordered for me, a vanilla latte, my favorite. I wanted to talk to you about something. My heart rate picked up slightly. Okay. I went to see Dad yesterday. At his new apartment downtown. Trevor had moved out of our home 2 weeks ago, per the separation agreement. He'd rented a luxury apartment in the Pearl District, probably trying to maintain appearances despite his crumbling professional reputation. How is he? I asked, genuinely curious despite everything. Cameron's expression was complicated, love and disappointment warring across her features. He's not good, Mom. The apartment is a mess. He looks like he hasn't been sleeping. He spent the entire visit trying to convince me that you'd orchestrated some kind of conspiracy against him, that the board turned on him because you manipulated them. What do you think? I asked quietly. I think he still doesn't understand what he did wrong. Not really. Cameron stirred her coffee absently. He kept saying things like I made one mistake and your mother is being vindictive and I built that company from nothing. When I showed him the incorporation documents proving your grandmother's investment funded the startup, he got angry. Said I was choosing sides. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this. I'm not in the middle anymore, Cameron said firmly. I'm on the side of truth. And the truth is that Dad took advantage of you for years, took credit for your work, and then when caught, tried to paint himself as the victim. She reached across the table and took my hand. I'm proud of you, Mom. For finally standing up for yourself. I just wish you'd done it sooner, so I could have grown up seeing you as the strong, accomplished woman you actually are instead of the quiet wife who always deferred to Dad. I felt tears threatening and blinked them back. I wish that too. Are you happy? Cameron asked suddenly. Now that it's all out in the open and you're running the company? I considered the question carefully. Happy isn't quite the right word. Relieved, maybe. Liberated. Exhausted. Sad about what was lost but hopeful about what comes next. That's a lot of feelings. It's a lot of change. We talked for another hour, about her classes at Berkeley, about the firm's rebranding plans, about the coffee date I had scheduled with Patricia Winters to discuss potential collaboration between our firms. Cameron told me about a structural engineering class she'd enrolled in for next semester. I always thought I'd study business like Dad, she said. But after reading about your work, about the calculations and designs you created, I realized I'm more interested in the technical side. The actual building, not just the selling. You'd be brilliant at it, I said, meaning it completely. When we finally left the cafe, Cameron hugged me tightly. I love you, Mom. And I'm sorry it took all this for me to really see you. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you know. Driving back to the office, I felt lighter somehow. My daughter understood now. She'd chosen truth over comfortable fiction, and that meant more to me than any business victory. The following week, the board approved my proposal to rebrand the firm. Brennan and Associates would become Brennan Design Collaborative, with my name prominently featured as founder and CEO. More significantly, we'd be restructuring our internal crediting system. Every project would list all contributing architects and engineers by name, ensuring no one's work disappeared into someone else's portfolio. Amber Hayes had resigned the day after the anniversary dinner, sending a brief email that simply said, "I'm sorry for my part in this. I was wrong." I'd heard through Diana Chen that she'd moved to Seattle to start over. I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, only a sad recognition that Trevor had positioned her as my replacement in every way, younger, more pliable, willing to accept being behind the scenes as long as she felt close to power. The divorce was finalized on a gray morning in October, exactly 4 months after the anniversary dinner. Trevor and I sat in a courtroom with our respective attorneys while a judge formalized the end of 18 years of marriage. Trevor looked diminished somehow, thinner, older, the confident swagger completely gone. When it was over, we stood in the courthouse hallway for a moment, neither quite sure what to say. "I hope you're satisfied," Trevor said finally, his voice bitter. "You've taken everything." "No," I corrected gently. "I took back what was mine." "There's a difference. I loved you, Natalie. Despite everything, I did love you." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the man I'd married but a stranger who'd built his entire identity on a foundation of my uncredited work and unacknowledged contributions. "You loved the version of me that stayed quiet," I said. "The one who made you look good without demanding recognition. That's not love, Trevor. That's convenience." I walked away then, out of the courthouse and into the October sunshine. Harold was waiting by his car, ready to drive me back to the office. "How do you feel?" he asked as we pulled into traffic. "Free," I said, surprising myself with the simplicity of the answer. "I feel free." That evening, I stood in what was now solely my home in Riverside Heights, the house I'd kept in the settlement. I walked through rooms filled with memories, some beautiful and some painful, all part of the complicated story of who I'd been and who I'd become. In my office, formerly our office, I'd hung a new photograph. It was from last week, taken at the topping out ceremony for the Riverside Convention Center, the massive project Trevor had once planned to present as his crowning achievement. In the photo, I stood with the construction crew, wearing a hard hat and holding the blueprints I'd personally designed. My name was clearly visible on the plans. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Winters, "Dinner next week to discuss the joint venture proposal?" I think Winters Brennan Design could be something extraordinary. I smiled, typing back my acceptance. Another message came through, this one from Diana Chen, "Lawrence and I are so proud of you. You've inspired more women than you know. Drinks Friday to celebrate your freedom?" And finally, one from Cameron, "Love you, Mom. Thank you for teaching me that it's never too late to stand up for yourself." I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city I'd helped shape with buildings bearing someone else's name for far too long. The riverside skyline was dotted with structures I'd designed, the Meridian Tower with its innovative sustainable cooling system, the Westbrook Cultural Center with its earthquake-resistant framework, the Medical Plaza with its natural light maximization design. They existed because of my calculations, my vision, my expertise. Soon, everyone would know that. I thought about the woman I'd been 18 years ago, brilliant, accomplished, but willing to diminish herself for the man she loved. I thought about the woman who'd stood in front of her mirror 3 months ago, preparing for an anniversary dinner that would change everything. And I thought about who I was now, CEO, architect, engineer, mother, and finally, fully myself. The golden cage I'd lived in for 18 years had been comfortable. The view was beautiful, the accommodations luxurious, the life seemingly perfect from the outside. But it was still a cage. And I'd finally found the courage to walk out, even knowing the world outside would be uncertain, difficult, and sometimes lonely. I removed the diamond bracelet from my wrist, the one I'd bought myself after Trevor gave mine to Amber. I'd worn it every day since the anniversary dinner, a reminder of my worth and my willingness to give myself what I deserved. Now I placed it in my jewelry box, no longer needing the symbol. The lesson had been learned, internalized, integrated into who I'd become. Tomorrow I would wake up in this house as Natalie Brennan, not Trevor's wife, not anyone's understudy, but fully myself. I would drive to an office bearing my name, lead a company I'd built, and design structures that would carry my signature. The cage door wasn't just open anymore. I'd walked through it, locked it behind me, and thrown away the key. And I was never going back. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.